Welcome, everybody. I am Jesse Weber, and we are coming to you right now with special coverage regarding the arrest and indictment of Sean Diddy Combs. And before we get started, you hear that little noise in the background? There's a fire alarm going off. Timing could not be worse, but it is okay. In my hands right now is the recently, I'm telling the last 10 minutes, unsealed indictment against Sean Combs, and I'm going to read it for you, and I'm going to go through it with you. I am breaking this down in real time. I haven't had a lot of time to really look at this. I'll give you my initial impressions, but remember, the music mogul, artist, producer, he's been arrested out in New York City. Reporting indicates that he was taken into custody last night by federal authorities at the Park Hyatt Hotel. This apparently comes after a grand jury has indicted him, which is not surprising. This is not something that we didn't expect. There was reporting for months that the 54-year-old would be the target of a criminal investigation, and this comes after his homes in Los Angeles and Miami were raided back in March. Now, he has been hit with numerous lawsuits alleging sexual assault, sex trafficking, illegal narcotics possession, gun possession. Now, to be clear, we didn't know what the charges would be. We guessed. And it looks like our guess was right, because as Mark Agnifilio, his attorney, said to the press today and last night, they were anticipating racketeering and sex trafficking charges, and that is what we see in this grand jury indictment. It is 14 pages long. There are 3 counts. One that makes up the majority of this indictment is the racketeering enterprise. So let me go through it with you right now. Now, racketeering, and by the way, I will tell you this is similar to what we saw with R. Kelly, who, as we know, was also indicted in federal court in New York. That was the Eastern District of New York. This is the Southern District. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 30 years in prison. So racketeering, what we are talking about here, is a criminal enterprise. And a conspiracy to commit the racketeering statute is there's a criminal agreement, there's a number of overt acts, there's predicate crimes. So there's things that Diddy is not necessarily being charged with on an individual basis, but they make up this criminal enterprise. In other words, there's evidence that will show this is a criminal enterprise. So I'm going to go through it with you right now. Again, this is from the Southern District of New York. It says, overview, count 1, racketeering conspiracy. For decades, Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Diddy, P.D., Love, they always use his name throughout this, the different monikers. The defendant abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influence of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. A few things here. One, Sean Combs is the only one who's actually listed in this indictment. He's the only named defendant. You have to wonder if anybody else will be cooperating with the government against him. Now, I will let you know, after a brief overview of this, I have not seen the specific names of any other individuals, including the people who filed lawsuits against him. But what this does indicate is they're trying to establish that there was a criminal enterprise, and it wasn't just him, it was his associates. And he is not being charged, I should say, with federal kidnapping or arson or forced labor, but it is a component of the racketeering case. Let's move on. The defendant operated his business headquartered at various times in Manhattan, so you can see why Manhattan has jurisdiction here, and Los Angeles under a variety of United States-based corporate entities, including Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, and Combs Global. Corporate entities in the Combs business included, among other things, record labels, a recording studio, and they go on the different businesses that he has. At all relevant times in this indictment, Sean Combs, the defendant, engaged in a persistent and pervasive pattern of abuse toward women and other individuals. This abuse was at times verbal, emotional, physical, sexual. As part of this pattern of abuse, Combs manipulated women to participate in highly orchestrated performances of sexual activity with male commercial sex workers. By the way, that is eerily reminiscent of what we heard from the person you see right there, Cassandra Ventura. Remember, she filed a lawsuit against Combs back in November of 2023, settled the day after. She had talked about these freak-offs. She had talked about being forced to engage in these kind of perverted sexual activities at the behest of Sean Combs. So this is kind of making this up. You wonder if she's a cooperating witness here. At times, Combs and others acting in his direction made arrangements for women and commercial sex workers to fly to Combs' location. Combs ensured participation from the women by, among other things, obtaining and distributing narcotics to them, controlling their careers, leveraging his financial support, and threatening to cut off the same and using intimidation and violence. This is, by the way, characteristic of when we talk about sex trafficking, where you are forcing or coercing or threatening someone into commercial sex activities, or you're transporting them across state lines through coercion or different methods for illegal sexual activity. And so let's continue on. Physical abuse by Sean Combs, the defendant, was recurrent and widely known. On numerous occasions from at least in or about 2009 and continuing for years, Combs assaulted women by, among other things, striking, punching, dragging, throwing objects at, and kicking them. These assaults were at times witnessed by others and included, this timing could not be better, what you're watching right now, one instance at a Los Angeles hotel in or about March 2016, which was captured on video and later publicly reported, where Combs kicked, dragged, and threw a vase at a woman as she was attempting to leave. That is Cassandra Ventura. When a member of the hotel security staff intervened, Combs attempted to bribe the staff member to ensure silence. Combs' violence was also not limited to these women. It extended to his employees, witnesses to his abuse, and others. Again, I read the R. Kelly indictment before this to get a sense. These allegations are eerily similar to what he was charged with and what he was ultimately convicted with. And by the way, we were wondering about whether or not that video, which Combs, remember, he admitted it was him. He went on Instagram and said and apologized for participating in that 2016 video. He didn't deny it. And we were wondering if this would be a part of this criminal indictment, this federal criminal indictment, and clearly it is. Sean Combs, the defendant, used the Combs business, including certain employees, to carry out, facilitate, and cover up his abuse and commercial sex. That term is you're going to hear that a lot, commercial sex. Equate that almost with sex trafficking. Those employees, including security staff, household staff, personal assistants, high-ranking supervisors, and other close associates, acted as Combs' intermediaries, and their conduct was facilitated and assisted by Combs' control of the Combs business. Then it talks about the Combs enterprise, so this criminal enterprise. From at least in or about 2008, so you're going all the way back to 2008, through or on about the date of the filing of this indictment, so even to this day, the defendant and others known and unknown were members and associates of a criminal organization. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other things, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. A little bit later, you're going to see that he's also charged specifically with sex trafficking. But as I mentioned, all of these underlying alleged crimes can make up a racketeering case. They are predicate crimes of a criminal enterprise. The Combs enterprise, including its leadership, its members, and its associates, constituted an enterprise. And by the way, let me just take 1 second as I'm reading this. This is also eerily similar to the Rodney Little Rod Jones lawsuit. He was one of the first people to file a lawsuit, former producer of Sean Combs. He alleged violations of racketeering law. So he was the one who made those allegations, and again, very consistent with what we are hearing here. And again, constituted an enterprise as defined under the United States Code, and this is a group of individuals associated in fact, although not a legal entity. So you can have a criminal enterprise. It doesn't have to be Sean Combs, Inc. If you have a bunch of people, they don't have to be incorporated. It can still be a criminal enterprise. The Combs enterprise consisted of the defendant entities within the Combs business, including but not limited to Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, and then they go through a number of different entities and people known and unknown. The Combs enterprise constituted an ongoing organization whose members functioned as a continuing unit for a common purpose of achieving the objectives of the Combs enterprise. The Combs enterprise was engaged in, and its activities affected interstate and foreign commerce. It operated in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere. A couple of things there. So now you see why this is being brought in the Southern District of New York, why they have jurisdiction. When you talk about common purpose, if you've been following us here on Law and Crime and you have been following the Young Thug trial, a racketeering case, that is the #1 theme. The prosecutors in that case have been trying to establish that all of these underlying crimes were for the common purpose of furthering that gang. Here, there is a common purpose of furthering the Combs enterprise. At all times relevant to this indictment, Sean Combs, the defendant, was the leader of the Combs enterprise. Sean Combs, the defendant, and others known and unknown participated in unlawful and other activities related to the conduct of the Combs Enterprises affairs. These individuals included certain Combs business employees, such as members of Combs security staff, household staff, personal assistants, high-ranking supervisors, as well as other close associates of Combs. Now, we don't know if that's from digital evidence that they obtained. We don't know if those people around him are cooperating with the government, or we do not know whether alleged victims of Combs this is their perspective of who's been involved. Okay, purposes of the Combs enterprise. The purpose of the Combs enterprise included the following. A, operating a global business in the media, entertainment, and lifestyle industries, and it talks about record labels, recording studio, alcohol, spirits business. B, preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power, reputation, and brand of Sean Combs, the defendant, as a musician, entrepreneur, and figure in the entertainment industry. Enriching members and associates of the enterprise, including its leader, Combs, and in particular those who demonstrated loyalty to Combs and willingness to conceal his crimes. Preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power of the Combs enterprise, including the power of its leader, Combs, through violence, use of firearms, threats of violence, coercion, verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. I know I said this a lot, but I'm just going to say it one more time. This is all consistent with what has been alleged in the multiple lawsuits that he has currently been facing, whether it is Cassandra Ventura, whether it's Joy Dickerson Neal, whether it's Jane Doe, whether it is Rodney Jones. So again, this is not entirely out of left field with what has been asserted against him. Another purpose of the enterprise, fulfilling the personal desires of Combs, particularly those related to Combs' sexual gratification, including the exploitation of women and the use of commercial sex workers, enabling Combs and other members and associates of the Combs enterprise to engage in unlawful acts of violence, including sexual violence, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, and it goes on. This one's interesting. Another purpose of this enterprise, securing absolute loyalty from members of the Combs enterprise, including through acts of violence and threats. And that, again, is something that we heard, particularly in the Rodney Jones lawsuit, that he was allegedly threatened by the defendant. And then finally, the last purpose, protecting the Combs enterprise and its members and associates, including Combs, from detection and prosecution by law enforcement authorities through acts of intimidation, manipulation, bribery, and threats of retaliation. So that is essentially saying obstruction of justice, right? Okay. Now, the means and methods of the enterprise. How did they do this? It says among the means and methods by Sean Combs, the defendant and other members, they used conduct and participate in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise. And there's a lot here. I'm not going to go through everything, but it basically says, one example, Combs and other members of the associates wielded the power and prestige of Combs' role at the Combs business to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into Combs' orbit, often under the pretense of a romantic relationship. Combs then used force, threats of force, coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers. This is where they talk about the freak-offs, and they go into a little bit more detail about the freak-offs. During freak-offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances to victims, in part to keep the victims obedient and compliant. Sometimes, unbeknownst to the victims, Combs kept videos he filmed of victims engaging in sex acts with commercial sex workers. Makes me wonder if that was what they obtained in those raids. Goes on, members and associates of Combs Enterprise facilitated the freak-offs by booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant, extra linens, lighting, cleaning the hotel rooms after the freak-offs to try to mitigate room damage, arranging for travel for victims, commercial sex workers, and Combs. So honestly, you're talking about an organization here, an organized effort to facilitate these alleged crimes. Combs subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse to cause the victims to engage in freak-offs. He maintained control over his victims. And again, there's a lot more here where they talk about this. This one. So this was important too, because we knew that there were allegations of alleged illegal firearms possession. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including Combs security personnel, at times carried firearms. On more than one occasion, Combs himself carried or brandished firearms to intimidate and threaten others, including victims of and witnesses to his abuse. In or about March of 2024, during searches of Combs' residence in Miami, Florida, Is this fire alarm that important? Come on, guys. I'm going over the Combs indictment here. I think we're fine. But anyway, it says in or about March 2024, during searches of Combs' residence in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, law enforcement seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers, as well as a drum magazine. Now, if you have been following us on Sidebar, you've been following us on Law&Crime, you know that that is now one of the charges facing the second potential attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Ryan Ralph, in that case, has been charged with the federal crime of possessing a firearm that had the obliterated serial numbers. So again, while Sean Combs isn't charged with this directly, it is part of the underlying criminal conspiracy, the racketeering case. I'm going to go a little bit more forward here. So he talks a little bit more employees, witnesses to his abuse, or others threatened Combs' authority or reputation, basically how he wielded power and influence to get people to do what he wants. Now, this is the section that talks about the racketeering conspiracy. From at least in or about 2008 through on or about the date of the filing of this indictment in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, the defendant and others, known and unknown, being persons employed by and associated with the Combs enterprises. This is more of a legal definition about what racketeering is. It basically says that's enterprise they engaged in and the activities affected interstate and foreign commerce and knowingly combined, conspired, confederated, and agreed together. You need that agreement. And with each other to violate the racketeering laws of the United States. So there needs to be an agreement to violate the law. That was to conduct and participate directly and indirectly in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprises through a pattern of racketeering activity. And it consists of, and this is where they have multiple different examples of the crime. So multiple acts involving kidnapping, chargeable under the following provisions of state law. Multiple acts involving arson. Multiple acts indicted under Title 18 relating to tampering with a witness. Multiple acts of forced labor. Multiple acts related to sex trafficking. So these are all these predicate crimes that I talked about when you're trying to prove racketeering. The same thing was charged in the R. Kelly case. You recall with the racketeering, he was charged with respect to underlying crimes of forced labor and things of that nature. So again, very similar. In terms of drug offenses, multiple offenses here involving the possession with intent to distribute or distribution of narcotics, and they go through a list of them, including meth. It was a part of the conspiracy that Sean Combs agreed with a conspirator to commit at least 2 acts of racketeering activity. You need at least 2 acts within the course of a 10-year span to ultimately be found guilty of racketeering. And this is a special section. Notice of special sentencing factor. From at least in or about 2009 up to and including in or about 2018 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, as part of his agreement to conduct and participate in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity, the defendant agreed to, in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, knowingly recruit, entice, harbor, transport, provide, obtain, and advertise, maintain, patronize, and solicit by any means a person knowing and in reckless disregard of the fact that means of force, threats of force, fraud, and coercion. This is described in a specific code. Any combination of such means would be used to cause the person to engage in a commercial sex act. So it's kind of a sex trafficking allegation there. And I believe, and I don't want to misstate here, and I'm going to look it up real quickly, I believe that this is actually a violation that could carry 20 years in prison. I'm just confirming it right now. This is the racketeering conspiracy. I'll get back to that and double check it. But that was all. Everything I just went through was count 1 in the indictment. Count 1. So now here is count 2. Sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, victim 1. Now we don't know who victim 1 is. That person has not been identified. But it says, from at least in or about 2009 up into and including in or about 2018 in the Southern District of New York, the defendant in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce. And it goes through the definition of what sex trafficking is, by means of force, threats of force, fraud, coercion, as described in the U.S. Code. Any combination would be used to cause the person to engage in a commercial sex act, and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the same person that Combs recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, and maintained a person, and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused victim 1 to engage in commercial sex acts. So again, we do not know who this person is. We can take guesses as who they are, but you have to go through a number of these lawsuits. By the way, assuming that one of these people who have filed a lawsuit against him is victim one. Could it be someone else? We don't know. Count 3, transportation to engage in prostitution. It's also a kind of sex trafficking charge. From at least in or about 2009 up into and including in or about 2004, the defendant knowingly transported an individual in interstate and foreign commerce with intent that the individual engage in prostitution, and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the same. To wit, Combs transported, aided, abetted, and willfully caused the transportation of female victims and commercial sex workers in interstate and foreign commerce on multiple occasions with the intent that they engage in prostitution. So again, that's a separate crime. I want to double check these, but I believe these could carry 10 years in prison. And then finally, so those are the 3 counts in the indictment. You have these 2 sex trafficking related charges, and then you have the racketeering charge. And then finally it ends with the forfeiture allegations. You see this a lot in criminal indictments. It's basically suggesting that if you lose this case, if you are convicted, you will have to forfeit over personal property over to the government. As a result of committing the offense alleged in count 1 of this indictment, the defendant shall forfeit to the United States any and all interest the defendant acquired or maintained in violation of the U.S. Code, any and all interest in, securities of, claims against, contract rights, and it goes on, or source of influence over the enterprise named and described herein. So basically, if you profited off of the criminal enterprise, you will have to disgorge those profits, which is very interesting because they are talking about him engaging in an enterprise that made money, that was involved in the music and entertainment industry, but it was also involved in narcotics and different possession as well. Now it says, as a result of committing the offense alleged in count 2 of this indictment, the defendant shall forfeit to the United States. And that's pretty much it. You have a couple more provisions, but that's a good synopsis of what you're seeing in this indictment right here. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We have a lot more coverage here on Law&Crime. Stay with us.